Hi, folks. Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about some documents that were declassified a little while ago that I didn't really take much notice of. They were from the US. I don't think it was the State Department, but it was involved in the late 1950s, early 1960s, the espionage activities of the FBI and the CIA, particularly, but not exclusively in relation to Cuba. I had a look at some of them, and you sort of don't have to spend much time before you realise that these are people who know they're doing the wrong thing. They know they're behaving illegally. It's all covert and subversive, and espionage, secret agents and whispering in shadows, all that sort of stuff. But it's fairly clear the only thing that they were frightened of, and the only thing that restrained them, kept them within limits, was a free press. So now I would have thought they'd have been concerned about Senate oversight committees or the Department of Justice saying, "Hey, you guys broke the law doing this." But in fact, they weren't concerned about any of that, or not that I could see. The only thing they were concerned about was a free press. Now, the press was free, or much freer in those days than it's completely owned by the globalists today. So these covert operatives that can in the case of, say, use all the organs of the state to try and subvert Donald Trump's presidency, for example, they can do that without fear of media exposure because the globalists own all the media establishments. Therefore, it's only it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely that anything will be reported other than in some small online media outlets. But the main media outlets, the big ones that have got all the audience, they won't touch it. So these people can engage in gross illegality without any fear of really being exposed or held to account or publicly embarrassed or shamed. And this means that this attitude or this lack of accountability that in effect it gives them means that they can go to exceptional levels of subversive activity without running risk of exposure. So now this is whether it's a false flag operation where the FBI sets up a fake kidnapping of a governor or sets up a fake insurrection or anything like that, then they can do that. Now, in a situation where the press was free, this would quickly be exposed. They'd be humiliated and embarrassed and shamed, and they just have to back off and fess up or just stop talking about it and so on. But they don't have to worry about that today. But back then they did, and this is something that sort of struck me as interesting, that they weren't concerned about legal oversight or administrative oversight, political oversight. It was only the media. And that really surprised me back in the day. But there you go. Now, just a sort of quick history lesson, that Cuba was sort of an American, mafia-controlled outpost to some extent, at least, in the 1950s, and there was a Soviet-assisted, communist-assisted communist revolution where Fidel Castro came along to create a socialist paradise, whereas he and his cronies lived like kings. The rest of the Cuban population, I suppose, as a lowest common denominator average, they probably were a bit better off, but the peasants. But that would be it, or any of the upper class, the middle classes, even lower middle classes, their standard of living declined. Nonetheless, Cuba became a communist outpost, and they were all cozy with the Russian communists of the day, the Soviet communists, and they were heavily subsidized by the Soviet communists, who bought sugar from them at really extortionate prices, just to artificially prop the Cuban economy up. And without that, the Cuban economy would have been in desperate straits. The American had an embargo Cuba. So anyway, Cuba became a communist revolution. The president there, Batista, was thrown out, and Fidel Castro and his communist goons came in. Now, the leftist media lionized Fidel Castro, and to try and make him sound legitimate, they said he was a PhD. Dr. Castro said, and this sort of thing. But he was a communist revolutionary. That was it. Che Guevara was the guys on all those T-shirts. He became a rather brutal and bloodthirsty, but nonetheless a sort of permanent revolutionary going into other countries in South America, trying to stir up trouble. But the Americans, the American government decided they wanted to get rid of Castro and wanted to get rid of the communists there, and were particularly concerned about the coziness with the Soviet communists and the Soviets. And people, if you haven't heard of it, in the early 60s, there was something that was called the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviets, the Soviet communists placed missile launching sites in Cuba, and this was viewed as tantamount to a virtual attack on the United States. President Kennedy was the president at the time, and it was perceived at the time anyway as a touch and go that World War III would start and there'd be a nuclear Armageddon. I don't think it really got that far. Nobody really wanted the confrontation. The Russians were putting the missiles there because the Americans put missile bases in Turkey, next to the Russian border or the Soviet Union border. So I think it was always intended to be a trade-off. You take your missiles out of Turkey, and we'll take our missiles out of Cuba. I think that was always, but it nearly ran off the rails, and tempers flared, and brinksmanship came in, and so on. So, but anyway, conflict was averted, but the Cold War stayed in place. Now, the view was that the American government just wanted to get rid of Castro and the communists out of Cuba generally, and so they looked at various ways. Can we subvert the population? Can we infiltrate the population with agents and get them to engage in acts of sabotage or get them to do things that will cause the government to engage in severe repression, measures of repression, which will make the government look bad, which will then give us opportunities through the media to portray them as heartless and cruel. And so there was propaganda angles, there was subversion. They also looked at assassination and clandestine means of assassination that ranged from knifings, shootings, poisonings, planting disinformation amongst the populace, infiltrate the populace and then plant disinformation that would cause the Cuban people to doubt their government, and any and every means to destabilize and shake the confidence, if you like, of the people in their government, and all sorts of things. Again, including assassination, not just of Fidel Castro, but other characters. It was interesting to look at they would identify somebody in Cuba who was a good, honest man doing hard, good work for the people, and as a result of his good, hard work and he was causing the communist government, Fidel Castro's government, to look good, because this guy's doing good work, helping the people, and so on and so forth. So they don't want the communist government, to look good. They want it to look bad. So they talk about killing off people in Cuba that are doing good work, that are bright, intelligent, capable people. So, well, if we can get rid of them, and it'll just leave the dummies behind, and they'll fuck everything up, and then that'll, and so on. So they were looking at all sorts of creative, some of it quite far-fetched. Some of it seems quite childlike. It's almost like it was cooked up by someone in junior high school. But the budget was pretty big. In the early 60s, the budget for this espionage department to fuck up the Cuban communist government back in the day, it was about $50 million. Now, $50 million in what, 1961 or 1962. That was a shitload of money, a shitload of money. So many hundreds of millions in today's money. So this department was lavishly funded and was trying to take Cuban exiles and turn them into subversive agents and teaching them how to go into a village and then stir up and agitate a mob to go and burn the banana plantation down or something like that on the basis of some alleged grievance that the government hadn't addressed and so on. So these are I mean, it's an outrage to think that a sovereign free nation like the United States would be engaging in this sort of level of espionage and subversion and infiltration and false flag operations, planting disinformation, all that sort of stuff. But they were, and the extent of it is also breathtaking. But the bit I come back to is today you sort of wonder, well, how can the deep state get away with undermining Trump's presidency for so long without getting exposed? Now, even today, even when they, you look at the recent Durham report, even when you look at they have been exposed for what they've done and got up to, but they've been so successful in controlling the entire public discourse through their control of the media that it's as if it never, their acts of sabotage of the Trump, illegal acts of sabotage of the Trump administration, it's as if it never happened because the media refused to talk about it. And 95% of the eyeballs are looking at the controlled media, the globalist controlled media. Then if 95% of the population aren't hearing about it, only 5% are, then that again gives the media conspiracy theory, it's Russian disinformation and so on. So they can get away with that because they control the media. Just think what would happen if we had a free media. I had no idea as a kid or as a young man growing up. In fact, it'll probably be only in the last 10 years or so, maybe a bit longer, but 15 years or so, where I came to realize that a free press, as irritating and annoying it might be and how silly it is sometimes, the free press is one of the absolute cornerstones of holding even a democratic government accountable. Once any people with power realize they won't be accountable, they won't be exposed, they won't be embarrassed, they won't be shamed. Once they know that, and through control of the media, they can be confident of that. Once they know that, they will then abuse their power to levels that I never imagined possible. Imagine if the entire media class was constantly banging on about mass migration and how destructive it is and how it's a scam and a rort and this sort of thing. The government would have to drop it straight away. They couldn't sustain that level of hostility to that policy. But because they control the media, and it's something the globalists did. Before we go ahead with the globalist project, we must control the media. It's not enough just to plant the odd disinformation story. It's not enough to plant some propaganda here and there. We have to control the entire narrative. We must control it. And this is why they're in such a lather over the social media, because this was something they didn't control. So the FBI, as part of the deep state, set out in the United States to actually incubate social media platforms that would be controlled by the deep state, who would only allow the narrative from the deep state, the approved narrative. This is the monstrosity of media control that we see today. And this in turn is what allows or permits or prevents accountability of the deep state as they go about implementing and enforcing the globalist project against the will of the people. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.